The Teachers Guild of New South Wales and Wellbeing Australia acknowledge the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia. We recognise their continuing connections to traditional lands and waters and would like to pay respect to the elders, past and present. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Dr. Fred Osman. As the President of the Teachers Guild of New South Wales, I'd like to thank you for joining us for this joint Guild education session with Wellbeing Australia on the topic Remote and Online Learning, Lessons Learned and Reflections to Inform the Future of Education. It's been an interesting time in the world and in education as school closures have forced many schools to think outside the box and come up with innovative, pragmatic solutions in order to deliver teaching and ensure learning can happen remotely. It is my great pleasure today to be joined by a distinguished panel, which includes Margaret Pond, Deputy Principal and the Head of Junior School from St Philip's Christian College, Cessnock, Mark Long, Principal from Penrith Selective High School, and Kathryn Taylor, Director of Wellbeing Australia, who will be moderating the event. For some housekeeping, please feel free to share your experiences, thoughts, and questions in the chat function, and pose any questions to the panel through the Q&A box on the Zoom control panel. Please keep your Q&A questions short and relevant to the topic on what we are talking about today. Our host will moderate and will tend to ask questions during our discussion panel. Thank you, Kathryn, Margaret, and Mark for joining us today.
Thank you very much, Fred. Well, welcome to all and thanks for joining this important topic. I'm Kathryn Taylor. I'm one of the directors of Wellbeing Australia. And as Fred said, I'm absolutely thrilled to continue our partnership together. We've been working with the Guild for a number of years now, and tonight is exactly one of these continued conversations we're having about what's working and how we're improving education for all those involved. So from a Wellbeing Australia perspective, our focus is positive, proactive planning. We recognise the challenges that everyone's facing and have been facing throughout many, many years, and we look for ways to improve everyone's worlds. We are founded in education, have been continuing to work in education for many, many years, as well as working with first responders, veterans, workplace and families. So as Fred mentioned, we are joined by some wonderful panellists. I'm just going to have them join us now. We have Margaret Pond, who is joining us from Cessnock, and Mark Long, who is joining us from Penrith. There we are all. So welcome this evening.
Good to see you, Kathryn.
Good to see you both. So today's continuing a conversation that you guys helped start at the end of last year when we were past that first experience of really being thrown into remote learning. And today we'd really like to take the time to think about, well, what did we learn and how did we adjust? What have we been doing recently in the last term that we've experienced? But I guess more importantly, what did we learn from that? How have our staff, our students in our communities reflected to say, well, this has worked really well, or here's some challenges and how have we adjusted to improve? So the focus tonight's really on that remote and digital learning, how technology has very quickly become our world. I'm sure you guys would agree, and how it's worked, but also potentially how it's possibly challenged us. So when we're looking at that, I guess we're looking at our teaching and learning practice, but also very much around well-being and how that's impacted and influenced those that are within our community. So one of the phrases we sort of spoke about in preparation for this evening that I think is a really important one is, how have we been able to create a calm or a consistency in our schools to help people have structure without rigidity? So maybe Mark, if you want to kick us off, just share a little bit about your school context and maybe reflecting on last year to now. What were some of those reflections on your learnings about remote and online learning as to how you improved your practice in the last term?
Yeah, thanks, Kathryn, and thanks to the Guild for having us and also Wellbeing Australia. So I guess as a little bit of context, our school is fully selective. Academically, it's a public school, 935 students, boys and girls. We have about 100 staff by the time you put in our admin staff and our other staff that work around the school. And we're just at the foot of the Blue Mountains with a fairly large drawing area. So we we thought last year was quite successful. We were really happy with that, but it was a big shift, and there was a lot of anxiety. And this year, it all happened really quickly, didn't it? And for me, actually, I was on long service leave at the end of the last 2 weeks of term, and I was in Queensland and on a break and also doing some study. And all of a sudden, we were back on, and it was pretty clear that things were going to happen in that way. So early in the term, it was nice to hear the staff in particular say, this isn't as hard as last year. You know, the unknown wasn't there. So I think that was really helpful. We had done some reflection around the learning. I guess as a reference point as well, we ran the timetable. We ran it, not the lessons completely live over Zoom for the entire duration, but we followed that structure. And that was really important. And the feedback from our parents and in particular, we wanted to make sure that our parents knew that between 9 and 3:20 that their kids were looked after, so they could do their work. And because I don't think there was as much anxiety this year about maybe losing their jobs, but then that did change with JobKeeper and whether that was going to happen as well. So from a wellbeing perspective, and I know that we spoke about it the last time we came together as a panel, it seems the more and more we get into it, we anchor things in Maslow and we anchor the pedagogy in Bloom. And if we can do those two things together to give people security, but the reflection at this point is people are well and truly tired and they're completely zoomed out. And I guess as all high school educators worked out, this was a different ballgame altogether because of the HSC. And that decision around what to do with the trials was confronting. I don't think any school leader took that decision lightly, regardless of where they landed. So we're quite happy, but I can't wait for them all to come back.
It's funny though, isn't it? And it's interesting you say that you felt last year went really well, but coming in there was a greater sense of calm in that sort of space, because I think that's been one of the biggest things that we've experienced is that although there was this, oh my gosh, it's happened overnight, we actually were succeeding in what we were doing. So it's nice to hear that you're able to continue that. So one of the things you continued this year was keeping that timetabling. Did that stay as consistent?
We stayed consistent with that, and I thought what was really nice, and people make decisions, I think, for the right reasons at that time, but to be able to offer our really broad co-curricular, our music, our student clubs program, they really digitized this time over Zoom, and that ability to keep kids connected with tutors, it also kept some of the staff that aren't on a permanent payroll, it looked after them. So as a broad community of sort of 3,000 people, that was an important part of the work. As well. So, yeah.
I think a lot of that, people are quite excited by that staying online for exactly those reasons. Those communities can come together when everybody's in different spaces or time zones or whatever, and you can sort of take up different opportunities. So thank you, Mark. I'm going to come back to a couple of things you mentioned, but Margaret, do you want to help us just get a feel for how you guys have been going from last year to now?
Certainly. Look, I'm Margaret from St Phillip's at Cessnock. We're in the heart of the Hunter Valley. If you've ever been up to the vineyards, you probably would have passed our school. We're an independent school, a K-12 school, and my role there has since 2006 been head of junior school, but this year I added in the deputy principal role. So that's given me a broader perspective, I guess, of what is involved in middle and senior school. So for us, similar to what Mark has commented there was even though it was a fast change, it was a much calmer approach from staff. I guess executive knew also what worked last time. We were able to pick up some of the things that we'd reflected on from last year and use that to tweak a few ideas that we'd had. But I think there was also a sense of calm from parents. They knew that this is sort of what we did last year, although we probably preferred to be on site. We knew that we were offering something that was quite high quality, and so parents were very familiar with what the routines were across the different ranges of the school. So for us, we have junior school, which is K-4, middle school 5 to 8, and senior school 9 to 12. And so in junior school, after last year's remote learning, we had done quite extensive surveys and used the data to guide what we were doing this year. And so our families said that they really enjoyed our recorded lessons rather than doing remote lessons. We use those more for wellbeing check-ins, and so being able to have the teachers record lessons was a positive for a few things. Firstly, teachers were able to put some time and effort into recording quality lessons that parents could show at any time to their children, or their children could rewatch. So children who needed to hear something over and over again, they could rewatch a lesson, but parents weren't locked into a time. So if they wanted to get up early and do it, because often parents are at that age, the children aren't independent, so they were able to do their own work from home around the children's timetable. So we put in a traffic light system across our whole school, actually, where we had must-dos, can-dos and should-dos, and so it sort of was a graduated level of importance. So the idea was to everyone start on the must-dos and then continue on as you're able to do. So for us in junior school, it was pretty much what we had done, but with some small tweaks, using Seesaw as our platform. But from 5 to 12, we have our learning management system that the children were quite familiar with, but even more so since last year's lockdown, we continue to upload things to our platform, and which was great for students who were sick, or families had gone on holidays during school term. They were able to still access their learning. So for us, it was quite an easy transition back to remote learning.
I love the traffic light system. Did that continue into middle school or just for junior?
So the idea of the three systems continued in through to year 12, but the traffic light, the image left us.
Year 12 didn't want traffic light.
They didn't want traffic light.
And you said your platform you used was Seesaw. Is that something you were using before all this, or is that something that you just got for it?
No, so last year we had some classes using Seesaw, some classes using Dojo, and we noticed, and from again feedback from staff and from families, was Seesaw was the preferred platform, and so that's what we used again for this year. And we had maintained that all grades had since the start of the year, even before we were going to plan and going to lockdown. That's something that we carried from last year, just being able to give more automated feedback to families regularly throughout the day. The students are used to uploading onto Seesaw because of what we've done last year. So that was just a natural transition for us. Yeah.
For those of us who don't know what Seesaw is that something that is a feedback system, feedback loop? Or
yeah, so it's an app that goes onto their iPads, or they can access it from mobile phones or other devices. And so you upload work to the app or the part of it, and then it gets marked and so ticked off digitally by teachers. Parents can give feedback. It's sort of like an email system but done online. Yeah.
Oh, very cool. So a lot of people are also using Google. What sort of platform are you using, Mark? What's your main tech basis there?
Yeah, so we use Google, and so I guess a combination of Google and Zoom. And what was quite nice, I think, like lots of schools, we've been working towards for a number of years, what will it be? And you sort of end up with different systems. Last year, one of the decisions right at the beginning was we need to have it consistent. And there's pros and cons to that, but we sort of went, we need to have that. It streamlines our professional learning. It allows people to work across faculties. And again, I think it's good for students, but really good for parents not to have to know where things are or how to work it through.
Yeah, and it's supporting that continued learning, isn't it? Because technology, everybody's got different levels of knowledge. And one of the comments that's just come from the room is that idea of being able to revisit recorded lessons is quite a good idea. Did Mark, did you find any pre-recording, or did you find live? What sort of teaching practices did your staff use?
They used a lot of live. But they would use some recording in terms of using hover cams and things like that to record some of the feedback when really deconstructing essays and responses, particularly in that HSC space. So kids could do that. The Department of Education had made a decision that the Zoom lessons couldn't be recorded. So that function had been switched off. And I don't think that's a bad thing. In a broad system of 750,000 students and 2,200 schools, that's a really difficult circumstance to be. So that's how we operated on that.
And it's interesting because the department did have different systems versus the Catholic and the independent system, and then the independent system, it sort of again branches out depending on schools. So I know in my work within schools, as you rightly say, the department schools, we can't record things, yet a lot of the work, and particularly the wellbeing work that I've been doing, we were recording for that accessibility. So if someone wasn't able to make it, or if they wanted to rewatch, it was something that, and I think that's a blessing that came through from the whole online practice, that actually if I missed it, or if I'm someone that really likes taking notes or absorbing and working through, I have that sort of potential.
Yeah.
Mark, you made an interesting comment. You said everything remained founded in Maslow and Bloom's. Can you just talk us through how you translated that into a remote sort of world?
Well, I think, like lots of us, and there'll be people on the call today and watching you, sort of a number of educational theorists, and some of them are really old. And then there's lots of new stuff. And I think in education, we deal with lots of new stuff. Some of that's really good. Some of that updates. And of course, the research around online learning is really different to what it was 20 years ago. I think sometimes there's new research that probably is a sales push on things. And I just like them because I sit there and think, we know that when we deal with humans, and that's the business we're in, if they're not safe and secure, they can't perform. They can't reach their potential maybe as easily if we can look after those fundamental things. And I just like it because you just get to revisit it and really sort of say, do we know, like, so we know that our teachers, we mark the roll every period, and the kids didn't have to have their cameras on the whole time, but the teachers had to connect and they had to know they were there. And we'd follow up, and we'd have admin staff who would call parents, and the parents really enjoyed it. They didn't get a call too often, but they knew that if their child was missing, we were going to call within 50 minutes. And that structure, which meant we didn't do a whole lot. But in the first week, the kids test a little bit and they go, oh, that model's back. I think it's just taking care of people. And when we talk about those two, when we talk about, in terms of Bloom, how do educators get to that high end and that really high order thinking to challenge kids? Because nobody knew when we were going back. And I think even with the upcoming return, I think we will probably, there'll be some days or weeks between now and the end of the year, we will be learning at home again. And we have to make sure that these young people have the best opportunities possible for the whole generation, that they're going to be contributing to the bigger picture. So it's quite macro, but I just like it. I think that they're both comfortable, and I think they're well known.
And it is your foundations, right? So as you say, we're dealing with people, so it is the foundation. So if we look at that safety, knowing that I'm following the same timetable, knowing that my teacher's calling the roll, knowing that my friends are there, that's all my standard safety pieces. So it's actually a really nice way to continue from that sort of piece. I think sometimes we assume it needs to be overcomplicated because we're bringing technology in, but technology is almost just facilitating those basic pieces.
Yeah.
So Margaret, if you sort of think, the main question I keep getting asked is, well, what has been, and this did come through previously with everyone registering, what has been the impact of home learning on the student achievement or learning outcomes? What do you think, or what have you seen in terms of those learning outcomes throughout this period?
I think there's been some positive outcomes. I think students, I think it also depends what level of engagement they've had at home, and that ranges from one family to another. So I think part of it, we're actually not going to know the impact of this extended time. Because of the lessons and the resources that we offered last year, we actually didn't notice a huge difference in coming back. And I think because it was a shorter time, we didn't actually notice a massive difference in the lower grades in K1 and 2, a little bit more gap than what we were hoping, but we were able to make that gap up. But this time, I don't think we're going to really know until we get back. Certainly, the content that we would have been offering face-to-face has been pretty much just flipped to remote, and we're seeing, assessments from, students from year 5 to 12. They're still doing those, they're still getting great scores, and the level of engagement, I guess varies from family to family, but we've tried to be very strategic in what we do to keep the students engaged. And so when we've noticed a little bit of dwindling off there, we've changed things just to get students back. And as Mark said, it's a matter of following up with families. How can we support you? Can we use some learning support staff? Can we use some of our release from face-to-face staff to Zoom in with the family and help them, or do we have them come back to school a bit earlier if they're just unable to do anything? So for me, it's being aware that it's not a one-size-fits-all approach to what learning is. What does that family need? What does this student need at this point in time, and how can we help and offer assistance just to get the best outcome?
Interesting, because I've noticed some of the students, and a lot of my work is with wellbeing and mental health challenges, and I've noticed those students really enjoying remote learning and enjoying that space. And it's not that they never want to go back, but they like having that accessibility and being able to really engage in their learning without potentially the social things or the other things that cause them some stress.
I was going to say the same thing. You know, there's the social anxiety that a lot of students have, even if they're not necessarily students with a diagnosis. It really, and I think even as adults, like some staff much prefer to do webinars rather than go to face-to-face conferences. So I think again, it's not realizing that one is good, one is bad. There is some good and bad in the other. And for children with some social issues, I think it's been excellent for them. So yeah.
Absolutely. Mark, did you have anything else to add?
I think you probably both covered it, but that ability to differentiate, whether it's for a disability or a learning ability, or I think at times, teachers struggle with differentiation. I mean, it's been a buzzword for at least a decade, really in that sense. And the ability now to put kids into breakout rooms, they don't know which level they're working at. But the teacher can ability group really well. We know in gifted ed, the effect size on ability grouping is really significant. But even with non-gifted students, you could still do that and not have to put kids at the front left table and the front back. And I think there's access, and I think there's been a lot. I mean, I don't think not all wellbeing has been bad. There's been some really big steps out of this, and what we can hold on to will be. Some will be easy to do, and some will require really strong advocacy from educators around what worked.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Mark, because I think there is a very strong sort of negative brushstroke across, well, technology is bad and it impacts everyone's work. And we're seeing it all in the media with Facebook and everything. And certainly there is some poor use of, but there's also some really constructive and positive ways that technology is enabling, supporting, facilitating really positive things. I think it's really henpicking those things, isn't it?
I think it is. And I think with technology and in a high school space, we've got great kids. So by all means, they're fantastic. And I think kids generally, they're wonderful. But the technology that they're accessing at school, in my opinion, is nowhere near as dangerous as the technology that they have access to on the bus, on the way home, at home, because it's a gateway to the world that is unfiltered. So the technology can't drive it. But we would be naive to think that the dangerous things are the things that kids are accessing through their education. That's just not true.
Yeah,
so the critical thinking skills to know what's right and what's wrong, and values and morals and decision making, that's the holistic. When we talk about the learning for the whole child, that's the work for not only educators, but to work in partnerships with families in the community.
And absolutely, going back to what Margaret said about the traffic light system, and that's the responsibility, prioritising, organisation, time management, all of those aspects that make us whole, right? So they're really critical skills for us to have end-to-end through education. And also going back to that online model, a lot of students that are looking at continuing their learning through university, TAFE, vocational, whatever it might be, that's all online, and that's going to continue to be so for some time. So we're really trying to equip that accessibility to reduce the inequity possibly.
Questions just going to say there on that's probably one of the biggest things that we learned last year with our students, especially from year 7 to 12, is the need to be able to transition and beyond school, and the ability to increase the amount of independent learning. So this year we radically changed the timetable, especially from years 9 to 12. So year 12 actually had one day that they weren't coming to school a week. This year it's been a Friday. And so on that day, work would be uploaded to the platform, and then that would be their work that they'd be expected to do. At the start of the year, they had the option to come to school, and then they had to sort of prove that they could continue on with their work and do it well. They always had the option to be at school. Teachers were always available for them, but a lot of them travel distances. A lot of them do other things. They prefer to work later in the day rather than in the morning. But as long as they could show that they were able to keep up with their learning, they were able to have, I think it was from term 2 onwards, year 12 didn't need to come to school on the Friday. But then they always had access to their teacher, via different methods. The same with students from year 7 to 11. They had a certain number of lessons that were face-to-face. We didn't quite get that proportion right this year, and so next year it will be a little bit different. So they had, I think it was 6 in a cycle of 2 weeks that were face-to-face, and 3 independent learning times, where they would be in a room with a teacher, but they would be supervised by different teachers. So it may not, if it was an English lesson, for example, it may not be the English teacher in there, but they would just go on with their learning. And the level of independence and the way that the students were really able to step up, that was a massive difference we noticed last year, so we carried on into this year. Next year we'll add a 1 lesson of face-to-face, just because it's some tweaks needed to be made, but overwhelmingly that has been a positive thing. And so it's taken a while for staff to get used to some changes that they need to make in their teaching, but it's really actually improved the quality of learning for our students.
And that's nice, it's that evolution, right? And the tweaking is natural, because that means we're assessing where that student group's at, how that subject's working, how the broader picture is, rather than just trying to do one thing for all. Questions come through just on some of the strategies that you guys were mentioning. Margaret, you were talking about increasing the engagement. So when those students, and Mark mentioned if students weren't turning up, what sort of strategies did you guys have to increase engagement within the students?
So from our young age, for the students, in fact, I'll go whole school first. So from K to 12, we had a choose your own adventure day every fortnight. And so that was a day technically to be non-screen time. And so it did in the older grades look like a little bit of a catch-up day where they could actually use their screens. But there's teachers designed like a table, for example, of different activities that they could choose from. In junior school, they were a range of KLA, so some of them backed up their learning that they were doing, but other things were just sideways learning that you could do outside, just very practical, bit of a less stress day for families to actually do remote learning, but do it in a fun way that the students were really looking forward to it. So we did that on a fortnightly basis. Sometimes they were themed, and other times they were just random activities that linked to it. Similar idea where they had a table of activities that they could choose from in middle school, and they linked it to competitions and with prizes. Middle school and senior school students love prizes, they love vouchers being posted out to them, so that was a great way to get their engagement. But often in their lessons, so in the recorded lessons, they'd have some joke or riddle or some question that they'd ask, and then the students would love to listen, so they could upload that onto their Seesaw platform, and then they'd get rewards, if they were able to do those challenges. But I think it was also about the way that the lessons were presented. So instead of presenting a maths lesson in a certain way, some of the teachers would go out to their shed and they'd be getting out the tools and doing things, and they'd be recording things out there, or they'd just be using practical things that the students could use around the house, because that is one of the benefits of remote learning. You have access to a lot of different resources. So we were trying to make their lesson, I guess, we use learning goals, learning intention, success criteria, and there's one called This Is Because, this is why we're doing it. We could make that a lot more intentional when they're in the home environment. So that was one way that we were able to do that for there. But social media, there was also competitions for parents, and they were linked to our wellbeing things as well as our chapel competitions. So it was just all areas of the school, they were just thriving because there was something to look forward to that was a bit fun and engaging.
Yeah, I love getting all the stuff out from the shed and everything. That's what we love. Mark, what about for your guys?
So I guess we started with just a level of high expectation that they would be in class. And like I said before, a large part of that is actually supporting parents to do that work. But as it goes on, and knowing that it would probably go on, that spike happened pretty quickly. There were lots of different things. I mean, teachers are amazing. Like I sit here tonight and I talk about it, and rightly so, they go, well, you didn't teach a whole lesson. When I do assemblies and I'll do other meetings with kids, but I think that they are absolute war horses for what they are able to pull off. And I'm really blessed that we've got our staff that we do. So I know there were lots of things happening there. There were 2 things I thought that were worth pointing out. We have Wednesday afternoon sport. So we have assembly and then go to sport on a Wednesday. We didn't repeat periods on that one. So that afternoon was opened up to kids would be out playing basketball, they'd be doing their own thing, they might be doing catch up. We had an IT hub, and we had a learning support hub for kids to access. Some did, but most didn't, but they got out and connected. Some of the students ran their clubs. So I guess at the cornerstone of it, as a school leader, how did we capture and operate, or let kids operationalize their student voice in a virtual sense? Because like, it's a foolish principle or set of school leaders who don't listen to what students have to say. And it doesn't mean it's always right, but allowing them to do it. So as a result of that, they had amazing different things. They had wellbeing weeks, they had theme days and other things around that. And it's that was really fascinating to see. We had nighttime music concerts and different showcases like that. So really interesting things. And I wasn't quite sure at the end of last term, I think we were all exhausted and really just done. And our students have a podcast. It's called The Penrith Perception. I was a bit cautious about it when they proposed it 12 months ago, but it's on Spotify and they've done a really good job. And I listened to that on the Saturday after the end of term, and I finished and I thought, they're okay. Because there was this beautiful sense of optimism, this sense of we got there, they laughed, they giggled, and there were probably 15 or 20 students that spoke. And I know those kids really well, so it's a cross section. It's not just that group. And I thought, wow, they're really resilient, but they were valued. And it didn't go perfect, but no one wants to be locked down for that long. But I thought that was important.
But even when we're at school, things aren't perfect. So we have to remember we don't live in an ideal world, right? So there's always something happening. So it's just about where and how that's sort of working from that side.
And I think you have to remind kids of that, because they sort of, like, at times they said, oh, this is so bad. And I said, no, but last year's year 12, they didn't get any carnivals. They didn't have the big events, because when we came back, it was all socially distanced. No, I said, you had all of it. And particularly to our year 12s, I said, term 3 of year 12, it's horrendously difficult every year. Like, you've had every major milestone event. And I did say to them, you will get a graduation. It will just be after. And we don't know a date yet, but it'll happen, I'm sure. So it's about hope, isn't it?
And I think that's the important thing. I agree with you that people are tired, but I don't think that means they're hopeless. Yeah.
No.
So I think people are hopeful and looking forward, but the fatigue is a natural fatigue when living in the environment that we're living in. And I don't think that's necessarily connected to the remote world or the technology. It's the broader perspective of everything. But you did touch a bit on the staff piece there, Mark, and I think it's really important. Quite often when we talk about teaching in schools, we talk a lot about the students, but we forget about the staff. What did you learn about your staff's needs and expectations of working in a remote or a tech-based setting?
But I think this time was longer. Oh, sorry, it was more challenging because it went for longer. And I think as that went on, it became more and more difficult. That they are, I really think, so I've been at the school for almost 5.5 years. I'm really beyond thankful, because I'm not sure I would have lasted. I was really glad that I wasn't a first year principal, but we have a lot of our colleagues that are in new roles. And that I think teachers inherently, we would probably be overrepresented in the category of perfectionism. So we have to keep saying to them, it can't quite be that, and that's okay. And giving permission around that. They don't need our permission, but it supports it. I think that's really important. And I don't think we can ever say thank you to our teachers enough. Like, I don't think I can. I know I get to the end of the year, I'm going to go, well, I don't know what else I can say or do, but that's an important thing for the profession. And we have to control that. We have to really control that narrative, because it's a great job, but it is difficult. And so I think they're the takeaways from the teachers, and how we keep working towards that will be, well, that's the $1 million question, isn't it? And how do we keep bringing people into the profession, knowing that the next couple of years probably won't still be smooth. So how do you support
that whole question of, well, people sometimes are saying, when do we get back to normal? What is normal? And that's certainly, as you say, the next few years, it's going to be a mixy-matchy sort of world. So how do we harness that? How do we sort of see where we go? Margaret, what about from the staff perspective for you? What did you learn about your staff's needs and expectations?
I guess we knew last year, especially in primary teachers are a bit of a different breed than secondary teachers. So if I speak from more of a primary perspective first, what they valued is having very clear and consistent messaging. And they did learn that even though we couldn't give them the precise steps, they knew things weren't set in concrete. As long as they knew that things were on our radar and we were working towards them, that really calmed them and made them feel relaxed. And so last year we did a daily check-in. So for 15 minutes at 3 o'clock, we'd Zoom all in, and that really helped us to maintain connection. And so that's something that we did again this year in junior school. Initially, because things were changing quite rapidly, we were having these check-ins daily, but now we have just 3 a week. And so everybody knows that you can Zoom out at 3:15. Sometimes people will want to stay a little bit longer and ask a question, but they know they have access to the executive junior school team or the middle school people at that time of the day. And so if they've got anything pressing, they'll email it throughout the day. That will form the agenda of what happens in the afternoon, because they're sort of a breed at our school who really want to do the absolute best, and they want to get started on it straight away so that they can, be making it the best that they can possibly be doing. And so by having those check-ins, that provided them with the communication that they needed. What it also allowed us to do was to have things that helped us to connect. So as people were Zooming in, we'd have the highlights of the day or the epic fails. And so as people were coming in, it was just a lovely, relaxed feel, just a casual chat. And, you'd often find out something fascinating to, especially the parents that have little children. Somebody did a poo on the toilet for the very first time, and that was exciting in their classroom, that Dad, I did a poo. And so that was his session. So there was always some fun facts at the start. But initially, when they were learning things about Seesaw, there are so many functions in there that were helpful for them to pass on. And so we created a segment in the agenda called Tech Tips. And the teachers, anything that they'd found, they just, would open it up for a couple of minutes and they'd pass on tech tips to each other. If they were detailed, they'd often do a webinar to each other, record it, and then send it out via email so that they could use it, as well as, some teacher tips that they'd also found. So in that, the meeting became, initially at the start, it was an information passing on session, but then it also allowed us to connect and collaborate and really work together just to, raise the bar in certain areas. So for us, it was how can we remain connected and really get the information that we needed.
Yeah. I saw creative teachers thrive. It's funny you mentioned the junior school, because a lot of the creative arts, but the staff who really love sort of shaking things up finally got this opportunity to test out these things they otherwise wouldn't have. Yeah. And I've had people say, I never would have been able to do this if it wasn't for this opportunity. And now I've got a resource that I can keep using for the next many years, kind of thing. So it's been really beneficial in that. And I think, Mark, you're right, when it's the passion. It really, the passion that the staff have, it's really about us remembering and recognizing what they're doing, because no matter whether you're a teaching staff or accounts or marketing or whatever your role is within the school, everybody has really adapted and been able to learn very quickly how to sort of do things and communicate in that totally different way. I agree with you, Margaret, that communication piece, that security and stability of what's expected and how. So I've got that framework, but there's no one who loves learning more than teachers. So I think they actually got to really love that and enjoy it. So thinking about that, you've both mentioned some fantastic things that have been doing. One of the questions that's come from the room is, what are the sort of the offerings, the educational offerings you've been doing in this remote space that are going to continue when you return to face-to-face? Mark, what will you be keeping?
Oh, I think there's some long discussions to happen with the staff around that. So I'm quite excited about the possibility to do some things differently, and then how we navigate around those industrial frameworks that we're quite locked in with will be interesting. Some of the things that I don't think we'll ever get away from again, which is wonderful. I don't think we'll ever do another parent-teacher night face-to-face. We might bring Year 7 in, because Year 7 parents are about, when we did a survey, they were probably 60-40, 60 are like, we're okay. But there are another 40% that sort of said, we'd love to see the school. And I dealt with a Year 8 family earlier on in the year, and like great family, and we just had to work through a couple of things just to support them. And they sort of said, we've never been on site. And we've always made that a cornerstone of our work, that when you can imagine when your child says, I'm in maths, you know what a maths room looks like, and you know what a lab looks like, and you know what the gym looks like. So I think we can do that. But the ability to do that's great. Our interviews, our orientation, our subject selection nights, parents not absolutely pushing themselves to the edge to constantly, for parent perfectionism. I think we can support that as a community as well. So I think there's lots of ways we can access Zoom and Teams and things like that. So I think they'll be fundamental. I'm really excited about what happens in the curriculum space in terms of how can we accelerate kids in maybe different subjects into university pathways without them always having to travel. How do we get them ready for that? How do we navigate digital citizenship responsibly? And then how do you access, I mean, even tonight, I'm not sure that if we all had to be at Concord Golf Club, and it's wonderful, if we would all be there right now, and then you'd miss out. And probably, like, I would never have met Margaret if we weren't doing it remotely. So I think there's great ways for the education community to connect, and that's quite limitless in terms of who you can access globally to make the experience better for your kids, your teachers, and your community.
Absolutely. I think you need a drone in your school to get those classrooms recorded. That's some amazing drone work in schools, sort of zooming around I think it's fascinating how much technology is sort of coming across into there. Absolutely. Margaret, what about your side, your view?
I would fully agree with Mark about the parent-teacher interviews. So that from last year, we decided this year we'll do a balance, one on site and one night via Zoom. So parents could either book in for a session if it was on site, or the other night was a Zoom session, and that worked really well. So that's just trying to target all families what they preferred best. But for us, it's a matter of, so some of these recorded lessons, we'll be able to use those in multiple ways. So there are different grades who had already experimented with flipped learning. And so really maximising that and making that the norm rather than, the rare thing that happens. I think it's given teachers a lot of confidence that they can do this, that when they, especially in the older grades, they can expect, and it all comes down to expectations in life. But when we expect students to have watched something and then go in deeper in class into the learning, that is a brilliant tool. For us, it's going to be keeping the independent learning approach in the older grades. So again, that has timetabling implications, but we're prepared to do that. In fact, this is the first year that we haven't lost any students because we had gone to this Friday optional day for year 11 and 12. There is a school about 40 minutes away who had been doing this for years, and often when students got to year 11, they would leave our school and go to that school. And because in an area like ours, some of the children are working and it suits them, so it just again gives them a bit of flexibility in the way that they're able to learn, to the point where people from the school 40, we've actually got a great relationship with them. They phoned and said, look, we've got no students for the first time ever, what have you done? And we say, well, actually adopted a similar approach to what you've done. So that's worked for us. And then there are procedural things like kiss and drop, parent pickup. They are procedures that for us at the start of the year, we even had one parent, a kindergarten parent, who wanted footsteps. They were petrified that their child wasn't able to walk from the front of the car park where teachers were out there welcoming to, probably about 50 steps away to the kindergarten room, because it's always been that they would come in and unpack their bags. For us, it was, we had a lot less separation anxiety. We just realised that the children were able to be resilient. And so some of those practical procedures that we had to change actually had a flow-on effect to some of the students' anxiety and well-being.
Interesting. And they're quite significant impacts to students feeling more comfortable in the space, but not necessarily what we were able to try before. Yeah. So you've both touched a bit on these tech-free days or times within the day. Do you think that tech-free or offline, when students don't have to be online, visible for the whole day, do you think they're really beneficial, or for staff as well?
Like the screen-free days?
Yeah.
I think it's essential. Like, everyone is just fatigued by looking at the screen. You can tell. We were actually given this idea from a few schools in Sydney who had been in remote learning long before we had to go remote. And they were saying after about 4 weeks, they noticed their teachers really hit the wall, their parents hit the wall, and their students did. So we thought, okay, what can we do to make sure that we don't have our, all our key stakeholders hitting the wall? And so for us, that was a lifesaver, really, because it gave them something to look forward to. It was something a bit different, but it just everyone just took a breath and just reassessed and just really enjoyed that day that was a bit different.
Absolutely. Mark, what about your
I agree. I mean, and I don't think we had as many screen-free days, but we tried to encourage the staff, and it took a couple of weeks, I think, to get the staff to understand it. How do you design your pedagogy around that? So how do you still have structure? Because that was a wellbeing component. How do you do that? How do you navigate with parents too, that it's not a free day? Because it's tricky. So sometimes language, we had a day, it was a learning consolidation day, because I knew that if I went screen-free, welfare day, no learning day, I'd have parents that weren't happy. And you're trying to bring the community with you, because none of our kids came to school, which meant that and I said this to the staff, I knew every time I walked out of the door that I was on site, I knew that when I was there and they weren't, that they were safe and their families were safe. So it's the complexity of the principalship, isn't it, around it? But you can't be on screen all the time. We all know that, and it's how you design it just changes. So yeah, you have to be adaptive.
Absolutely. Everybody gets sick of looking at themselves. That's what I hear from people. Everyone's staring at themselves for too long. So do you guys think, and we said, like, from a tech AI sort of perspective, it's expanding. We can see it. They've been talking about it for years, and really since we designed the aeroplane, it's sort of continued. In universities, we're seeing a lot more AI come in terms of teaching practices and tried and tested learning and the opportunities people are getting. Do you guys think it's going to continue to expand? How do you think that this sort of opportunity may take us into the future of teaching and learning practices in schools?
I shudder at the thought. But that's okay. I mean, I guess you just say, it's like anything that you're not sure of. You need to be at the table and you have to shape it. And I think good pedagogy, you cannot get away from it. Like, it's good teachers are great teachers. But it's coming. It's already here. And I think there's almost this arms race happening between platforms like Turnitin and then other platforms where they'll write the essay for the student, and who's got the better algorithm to work out who's plagiarized and who hasn't. That's there. Look at the quality of the work coming out of places like Stanford in partnership with Microsoft and Google. And I mean, as we know, and we see this in our political discourse, education's a big industry and there's big money globally. So it's not going. So you really have to be aware of it and structure things. But at its core, it still comes down to academic integrity. And how you teach those skills to kids is critical.
I'd agree. And you're right, there's so many different avenues to educate kids on, not just from the use of technology, but from that practical point of regulation and learning boundaries and the cyber safety and all of those aspects as well. So the potential's there. It's just about us setting some frameworks. Margaret, what's your thoughts?
I think you've summed it up very well. I think it's out there. There are so many things out there. So we need to embrace it, but we just need to be careful, how we embrace it, how we use it. But we'd be foolish not to maximise the use of it, because it is the way of the future.
What about from an assessment and testing point of view? Well, you've mentioned Turnitin. Do you see us using more technology, or how are we going to approach? I mean, the HSC is the fascinating question, right? But it's sort of forced a bigger conversation about what is the right way for us to assess.
Well, even like NAPLAN going digital at this time, that's an example of how we've started. But I think with things like the HSC, we're bound by the HSC in certain ways where we need to continue the written work, because the HSC is still written. They need to be able to write very quickly. So it's a matter of preparing them in a range of, it's not an A to C is not directly through B. There are lots of different pathways. So I guess you've just got to have a range of, activities or resources that you do just to be able to get them to, a productive C.
And I think with assessment, I mean, we're sort of talking in the different forms of assessment, but to keep it simple, what could you harness to maybe to save teacher time and to improve feedback around formative assessment? And then how does that look with summative assessment, and how does that work? So we made a decision. We didn't run our trial HSC. That's probably one of the biggest decisions. It'd be in the top 5 of the decisions that I ever had to make as a principal. Because what's that impact for those young people? And we did family surveys, we did a fair bit of mathematical work with it, we looked and we reached that decision, and it was really well supported. But that was contextually relevant for us. But in terms of assessment, we were only having an executive meeting today around, well, I think I want to run an online test for that. And I'm like, well, how's it going to look? What might that proctoring look like? And I think teachers and educators, we always have to look and say, if we want to deal with the issue of academic malpractice, we have to design really strong assessments, because a large part of academic malpractice does fall out of poorly designed assessment. I'm not disputing the fact that there are other ways to cheat, but that's a really complex skill as an educator to develop that.
Yeah, and it's a significant issue in universities, and universities are continuing to try to work through that problem. So it's something that we need to come together to have round tables on as to what is best practice and how do we establish and educate and set systems and use the technology that's there to give us safer but also more secure systems to have it. So I guess just we've got about 10 minutes. The time always vanishes when I talk to you guys. Key question, and I guess we've touched on it in a number of different ways, but well-being, the well-being of your staff, the well-being of your students, your community as a whole. What did you see or do this time, and how are you moving forward? So just thinking from a future perspective, how are you really developing your staff's well-being to manage these in and out of remote situations that we're sort of living with, as we mentioned? Mark, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, I'm happy to pick that up. I still think, Margaret touched on it before, we don't know what we're going to come up against in the next 3 months. We just know, I think term 4 is going to be brutally difficult. It's going to be like probably nothing else we've seen, and I think it's going to be tough. But longer term, we don't know what we're dealing with. So I often go and talk to our psychologists at school. Like they'll give me a rundown about their kids, and they'll sit in their wonderful beanbags and go, what's the psychological basis for this? Like, what does this mean? And we often come back to structure, clear communication, authenticity, well-structured. Don't change your mind too often. Like, people will understand when you've got to adapt, but don't do it too often. Like, set a pathway and be fair, be as consistent as you can be, I think is probably the most important thing that we will do. And they will often say to me, that's really important psychologically. Like, people can't constantly respond to doing that. So I really hope for us in the immediate future that there's not a decision next week that schools come back another week earlier, because we just need to lock in and go with it. Longer term, I know in the department and at a school level, one of the department's key strategic directions is that education is a great place to work. Well, what does that look like? And how do we structure that so we can attract people but also keep people? Because we can't afford to keep losing people. And I know as a principal, I need to have the highest quality workforce that I can have. I don't need to have all the people that have taught the HSC for 30 years. I need a mixture, and I need good succession planning to make sure we've got a constant flow to meet the needs of the kids. But how does that look? And often in a lot of teacher surveys, we find data around flexibility for teachers is not what it is for non-educators. So lots of people have quite enjoyed working from home. You know, they're not lazy, but they've probably been able to put dinner on or put a load of washing out and then spend some time with their kids. So I'm not concerned, but I'm really cognizant. Are we going to see teachers not prepared to travel the distances they would? Are we going to see them leave? Are we going to see them apply for jobs in head office? Then how do we put people in classrooms? And there are enormous challenges, I think, that we face as systems, as schools. It doesn't matter. So how is education a great place to work beyond COVID?
Absolutely. And that's the key, isn't it? Because it is taking the evidence that is there now, and education is an evidence-based industry, right? That many teachers thrived in this remote setting, as did many students. So why are we not offering that flexibility, and how can we bring that through? Because I think you're right, the retention and the growth and the opportunities for educational staff, particularly in the teaching roles, we need to rethink it and we need to evolve it, because what is working has been working for a long time, but we've seen the potential, right? And I think it is, sometimes you've touched on that, you know, people aren't lazy or that, but people traveling long distances, people not seeing their children, people being so dedicated to their work that they're actually missing out on their home lives for the love of their role. And this is given a window of awareness to how that balance can look.
Yeah.
Margaret, what about your world, wellbeing world?
So for me, I think we've touched on it as well, just the gratitude that we have for our staff. And like, it's not just, as we've mentioned already, it's not teachers, it's everybody. And what we found, I guess, with the non-teaching staff body, was something that we had underestimated last year, especially after we had been into this for 3 or 4 weeks, and they'd done all of the jobs that they'd had on their list to do that they just couldn't get to. It was like, okay, so what do we do now? And so it was giving them a greater sense of purpose, and what could they do that they may not be able to do. So we're in the embarking on some new building designs. And so for someone like the science lab assistant, it was, okay, can you spend some time researching what a new science lab could look like? What sort of food preparation areas would you like, and just being able for them to do things that were sideways type things and having big dreams, and then reporting back. There were roles that weren't even in their areas that we would have normally have given them that they were able to do, and then they felt really valued. So for us, it was, okay, so this is how you're feeling. Listening, taking the time to listen to your staff. And so we had key people that we would phone. There were some people that we'd phone more regularly, but everybody got phoned by an executive every fortnight. And so we were able to just have a conversation. Sometimes it was just a common chat, about random things, but more just a check-in. But there were times where we were, asking strategic questions so that we could get some great factual knowledge about how they were feeling, how they were finding things, and getting their input into what needed to be changed to be able to assist them. I guess the other thing is modelling. There are so many staff on our executive, myself included, that could be considered a bit of a workaholic. And so if we're going to be saying on one hand to staff, please look after your wellbeing, we need to be modelling that. And so that was something that I learnt last year, and also was encouraged by like a professional companion I had last year. And it was as simple as, what would it take to make you feel that you were having a more balanced life? And just the actual fact of, okay, well, it'd be me feeling I was doing that, but for me it was stopping at 5 o'clock on Zoom, because those lines are often blurred when you're working from home. Your work and home life are just, it could be 24/7, but at 5 o'clock I would just stop and I think, okay, what is actually urgent that I need to get done in the next 20 minutes, half an hour, or what can I leave? And every day, unless there was some emergency at 5:30, I was out playing games with the kids, and that wouldn't even happen on a normal day. So for me, it was modelling, and I didn't realise the power of that to my staff, because they were hearing me talk about something that I'd done with my children, and then that allowed them to feel free that they could stop at a certain time. And so I think we can't just say things and be doing different things ourselves. So that was probably my biggest learning from last year, that I was quite strategic in what I needed to do this year.
It's again that fine line with passion, right? Because it's the passion that drives you to keep working, and that's often our success as senior leaders is due to our hard work and our persistence and our dedication. So having those boundaries, especially while everything's blurred, is really quite critical. Look, I thank you both. So much information to think over, and certainly what I loved was hearing the perspectives from what was happening within your student population, things that you had been able to evolve, and some of those things that you trialed during the lockdowns and during the time of remote, but also the value you see moving forward. And I love how you've been able to see that there's actually a connection for the parent and friend community, right? And Mark, as you said, with the parent teacher nights and with selective, selection nights and things like that being accessible, people were saying to me, I'm able to be here feeding my baby, my kids, while still doing the things that I want to do and I want to be part of. So I think overwhelmingly there's so much that's positive in this space and so much potential and opportunity. It's possibly about us coming together as a think tank of, but how? What are those foundations? What are those frameworks? What are the things we need to unpack a little bit more to be able to continue to make these steps forward? So thank you, Mark. Thank you, Margaret. I will hand over to Fred to share his final words.
Yeah, thank you, Kathryn. Thank you, Margaret. Thank you, Mark. What a wonderful, informative session. On behalf of the Teachers Guild of New South Wales and the Board of Wellbeing Australia, I'd like to thank you for your providing the time to share the education learnings and wonderful engaging reflection and discussions which we can all take away and apply to our own teaching practice with remote and online learning. On behalf of the Teachers Guild of New South Wales and Wellbeing Australia, please pass on our thanks for the amazing work our teachers do every day, especially during these challenging times. So just in terms of follow-up, The event recording will be sent out along with a certificate of attendance and a short post survey to help us shape our future online webinars. And thank you for joining our event. We wish you and your students a safe return to school, and we look forward to see you at future events. Please stay safe. Thank you.